My favorite hero.
And I have a lot of guys that I look up to their accomplishments, but I wouldn't call them my heroes.
Right. You don't wear another man's jersey on your back.
Yeah.
Respect. Your favorite villain?
My favorite villain? I kind of like Diddy.
He cold.
Watch this closely. 50 Cent isn't reacting out of humor. He's reacting because Netflix just crossed a line that makes things far worse for Diddy, and the reason he's smiling says more than any statement ever could.
What was he intending to use it for?
I have no idea what he was doing that for.
I mean, you know, you're talking about a man who films himself doing everything and has for decades. I think he wanted someone to be behind this.
This isn't coincidence. The timing, the silence, and 50 Cent's reaction all point to one thing Netflix didn't soften the story. They sharpened it. People think 50 Cent is entertained. He's not. He's confident. Because what Netflix just did doesn't escalate the drama, it locks the narrative. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. Do you think Netflix intentionally waited to make this move, or do you believe they were forced into it by pressure they could no longer control? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want clear, structured updates on this story as it continues to evolve, make sure you subscribe now. This isn't a situation where details are optional, they're everything. Let's get back to the story. When someone like 50 Cent reacts the way he did, it's important to understand what he's reacting to. He isn't responding to headlines. He isn't responding to outrage. He's responding to positioning. In the entertainment industry, the way a story is framed matters more than the volume of noise around it. And Netflix just made a framing decision that cannot be walked back. For a long time, Diddy benefited from fragmentation. Stories existed, but they were scattered. Allegations surfaced, but they were isolated. Conversations happened, but they never fully connected. That fragmentation allowed defenders to dismiss concerns as coincidence, bias, or opportunism. What Netflix has now done is remove that fragmentation. This is where the situation becomes more serious. Instead of treating controversy as a series of disconnected moments, Netflix has reportedly shifted toward continuity, not adding chaos, but organizing it. An organization is dangerous because it turns interpretation into structure. Once a structure exists, the audience doesn't need to speculate. They can follow the sequence themselves. That's why 50 Cent isn't joking. People often misread his public persona. They mistake silence for disinterest and smiles for mockery. But historically, when he reacts calmly, it's because the outcome is already clear to him. He understands how narratives end because he understands how they collapse. Not all at once, but layer by layer. What Netflix just did signals commitment. Platforms of this size do not make subtle shifts accidentally. Every word choice, every cut, every decision is reviewed not just by creatives, but by legal teams and executives. When a company chooses to sharpen a story instead of neutralizing it, it means they believe the material can withstand scrutiny. That belief changes everything. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that exposure requires new accusations. It doesn't. Sometimes exposure comes from context, from placing known information into a sequence that reveals patterns. Patterns are harder to dismiss than claims because they don't rely on belief, they rely on consistency. And consistency is exactly what Netflix appears to be emphasizing now. This explains why the reaction isn't loud. There's no dramatic announcement, no aggressive promotion, just a noticeable shift in tone. In media, that kind of quiet move is more consequential than public statements. Loud moves invite pushback. Quiet ones settle in. Another detail that matters is who hasn't responded. When narratives shift this way, defenders usually appear quickly. Statements are released, interviews are offered, reassurances are made, but what we're seeing instead is hesitation. And hesitation at this level suggests uncertainty behind the scenes. That uncertainty is what 50 Cent recognizes. He's seen this before. He's watched public figures maintain control as long as stories remain debatable. But once debate gives way to documentation, control slips away. At that point, reactions become reactive rather than proactive. And that's when recovery becomes difficult. This moment is not about whether people believe everything presented. It's about whether the audience is being guided toward a conclusion instead of being asked to choose one. Netflix appears to have made that decision, and that's why this matters. Because when a platform stops asking questions and starts arranging answers, the conversation changes. Viewers no longer argue about possibilities. They begin discussing implications. That shift alone can redefine a public figure's legacy. What's especially important here is timing. This move didn't happen at the height of Diddy's influence. It didn't happen when his control was strongest. It's happening now, when cultural tolerance for ambiguity has eroded. Audiences today are far less willing to accept silence as innocence. They read silence as strategy. Netflix understands that. This also explains why the reaction from 50 Cent isn't emotional, it's measured. He isn't celebrating, he's acknowledging finality. In his world, this is the point where outcomes stop being negotiable. As viewers, this is the moment where watching casually is no longer enough. Not because outrage is required, but because understanding context matters. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about recognizing how stories evolve when power no longer dictates pacing. Netflix didn't suddenly decide to make things worse for Diddy. They decided to stop protecting ambiguity. And ambiguity has been one of the most effective shields in this story for years. Once that shield is removed, everything looks different. Past defenses feel incomplete. Past explanations feel selective. And even achievements begin to carry a different weight. This is why the phrase "Netflix made it worse" doesn't mean louder or more aggressive. It means more complete, more structured, more difficult to dismantle. And this is only the first stage. What comes next isn't about shock value. It's about consequence. Not legal consequence necessarily, but historical consequence. The way this story is remembered moving forward will not resemble how it was discussed before. That's the shift 50 Cent is responding to. And now that it's underway, it doesn't require constant reinforcement. It simply unfolds. This establishes the foundation, the understanding of why reactions matter more than statements, why framing outweighs volume, and why this moment feels irreversible. As we move forward, the focus shifts from what Netflix did to what that decision triggers across the industry, among those who stayed silent, and within public perception itself. Because once a narrative locks, it doesn't ask permission, it moves forward. What happens after a narrative locks is rarely dramatic at first. There are no immediate explosions, no public breakdowns, no sudden confessions. Instead, something more subtle begins to occur. Conversations change, language tightens, and the room around the subject slowly empties. That's the phase this story has now entered. Netflix didn't just adjust tone for creative reasons. They adjusted it because tone is how responsibility is communicated without accusation. When a platform moves from open-ended storytelling to structured sequencing, it signals confidence. Confidence that the audience will arrive at conclusions on their own. And when that happens, the platform no longer needs to persuade. It only needs to present. This is where things become significantly worse for Diddy. For years, his public narrative survived because every controversy could be treated as separate. One accusation here, one rumor there, one uncomfortable story that faded before it connected to the next. Isolation protected him. Netflix's recent shift removes that isolation, and once events are placed in sequence, they begin to explain each other. That explanation is what people underestimate. Viewers don't need explicit accusations to feel certainty. They need continuity. When the same behaviors appear across time, settings, and relationships, coincidence stops being persuasive. Patterns take over. And patterns don't rely on belief. They rely on recognition. This is why the reaction from people close to the situation has been so restrained. When narratives are still fluid, there's room to intervene. Statements can redirect attention. Interviews can soften impact. But when a narrative becomes structural, intervention risks reinforcing the very thing it's trying to deny. Silence at that point becomes the least damaging option. Netflix understands this dynamic. They've seen it play out before, and that's why this move feels calculated rather than reactive. They aren't responding to outrage. They're responding to inevitability, the kind that develops when too many unanswered questions exist for too long. One of the most important shifts in Season 2's approach is perspective. Instead of treating Diddy as a powerful individual surrounded by controversy, the narrative reportedly repositions him as the constant variable. The environment stops being the explanation. The repetition does. That's a dangerous reframing for anyone whose influence depended on ambiguity. People often ask why the industry tolerated this for so long. The answer isn't ignorance, it's incentive. Proximity to power brings opportunity, protection, and silence. Challenging that power comes with risk. Season 2 reportedly doesn't accuse everyone of wrongdoing, but it does illuminate how silence became normalized. And normalization is what allows patterns to persist. This is also where the legal dimension becomes important. Documentaries at this level don't rely on impulse. Every claim is reviewed, every implication is weighed. When Netflix chooses to move forward with sharper framing, it suggests confidence that what's being presented can withstand scrutiny. That doesn't mean lawsuits won't happen. It means the platform is prepared for them. Preparedness is another signal 50 Cent is picking up on. His confidence doesn't come from inside knowledge of legal outcomes. It comes from understanding how momentum works. Once a story reaches this stage, it no longer needs new information to stay alive. It sustains itself through interpretation. Media outlets adjust their language. Interviews become cautious. Praise becomes qualified. You can already see this shift happening. Coverage has become more deliberate, less defensive, more observational. That's not coincidence. Media follows perception, and perception is already changing, slowly but decisively. Another overlooked factor is how Season 2 reframes past defenses. Statements that once sounded reasonable now feel incomplete when placed alongside broader context. Explanations that relied on isolation lose strength when continuity is introduced. This retroactive effect is powerful. It doesn't just influence future opinion, it rewrites memory, and memory is where legacies are decided. This is why the phrase "Netflix made it worse" doesn't refer to emotional impact, it refers to permanence. Once a narrative reaches this level of structure, it doesn't dissolve when attention shifts. It becomes the reference point for everything that follows. For Diddy, that means future projects, appearances, and mentions will always be filtered through this context. Even silence will be interpreted. Even success will be questioned. Not because audiences are hostile, but because awareness has changed. Season 2 reportedly leans into this awareness instead of resisting it. That decision matters. Platforms can choose to minimize discomfort or confront it. Netflix appears to have chosen confrontation, not through accusation, but through arrangement. Arrangement is powerful because it removes the need for commentary. The audience does the work themselves. This also explains why 50 Cent didn't need to elaborate on his reaction. He didn't need to explain what Netflix did or why it matters. His confidence communicates recognition. Recognition that the story has crossed from debate into definition. As viewers, this is the point where understanding becomes more important than reaction. Not everything presented will be new, but how it's presented will change how it's understood. And understanding is what shapes long-term perception. This isn't about predicting consequences. It's about recognizing direction. The direction is toward consolidation, toward a single coherent narrative, replacing years of fragmentation. Once fragmentation disappears, protection disappears with it. That's the real shift taking place, and it doesn't end here. As the story continues, the focus will move beyond what Netflix did and toward what that decision reveals. About the industry, about silence, about how long power can delay accountability but not erase it. This part of the story matters because it explains why this moment feels different, why reactions are muted, why confidence replaces outrage, and why those paying attention understand that this isn't a temporary cycle. It's a turning point. And once turning points pass, there's no return to the way things were before. By the time a story reaches this stage, the outcome no longer depends on new revelations. It depends on how what already exists is understood. That's the phase this situation has entered. The conversation around Diddy is no longer centered on whether something happened. It's centered on how long it was allowed to happen without consequence. That shift is subtle, but it's decisive. When Netflix chose to refine the framing instead of expanding the noise, they signaled that the story no longer needed escalation. It needed resolution. Not closure in the legal sense, but resolution in the public sense. The kind that changes how everything before it is remembered. This is what makes recovery unlikely. Public figures don't lose influence because of one moment. They lose it when trust erodes faster than it can be repaired. And trust doesn't erode through accusation alone. It erodes when explanation stops satisfying, when silence stops feeling neutral, when defenses begin to feel incomplete rather than reassuring. Season 2 appears to operate entirely in that space. Instead of asking viewers to believe anything new, it reportedly asks them to reconsider what they already know, to view past moments not as isolated controversies but as part of a continuous story that now has structure. Once that structure is visible, interpretation changes automatically. No persuasion required. This is why the phrase "Netflix made it worse" doesn't mean louder or more aggressive. It means more final, more settled. Worse not in tone, but in consequence. Because once perception settles, it doesn't need reinforcement. This is also where 50 Cent's reaction becomes fully understandable. His smile isn't entertainment, it's recognition. He recognizes the moment when a narrative no longer needs defenders or attackers. It sustains itself. He's seen it happen to others. He understands the pattern. Stories like this don't end with dramatic announcements. They end with distance, with people choosing not to associate, with invitations quietly disappearing, with praise becoming cautious, then rare, then absent. Not because of coordinated effort, but because reputational gravity shifts. That's the part many people misunderstand. There doesn't need to be a single, defining collapse. Once the benefit of the doubt is gone, everything else follows naturally. Interviews feel different. Appearances feel heavier. Even success carries a question mark, not shouted but implied. Season 2 appears designed to remove that benefit of the doubt permanently. It does this by addressing the most uncomfortable question of all. Not what happened, but why it was normalized. Why so many moments passed without resolution. Why silence became the default response. That question implicates more than one person, even without accusations. And that's why the industry reaction matters as much as the content itself. Notice who is speaking carefully. Notice who isn't speaking at all. Silence at this stage isn't strategy, it's acceptance. Netflix understands that once a story reaches this level of clarity, there's no advantage in denial. The smarter move is precision, letting the material speak without embellishment, allowing viewers to connect dots rather than drawing lines for them. That approach doesn't provoke outrage. It provokes recognition, and recognition is permanent. For Diddy, this means the narrative is no longer flexible. It no longer shifts based on timing or distraction. It's fixed. Every future discussion will begin from this point, not from where things stood years ago. That's what makes this a turning point rather than a cycle. Cycles repeat, turning points redefine. This also explains why this moment feels different from every headline that came before it. Headlines spike interest and disappear. Structured narratives remain. They become reference points. They reshape memory, and memory is where legacy lives or collapses. Season 2 doesn't need to answer every question to achieve this. It only needs to answer enough to make alternative explanations feel implausible. Once that happens, debate becomes secondary. Acceptance takes over. That doesn't mean everyone agrees. It means the center of gravity shifts. And once gravity shifts, everything else adjusts around it. This is the phase where outcomes stop being speculative and start being directional. Not necessarily legal outcomes, but cultural ones. Reputation, influence, and relevance don't vanish instantly. They diminish gradually, then suddenly feel gone. That's the process now underway. This story isn't finished in the sense of finality, but it is finished in the sense of exposure. The phase where ambiguity protected silence is over. The phase where documentation defines memory has begun. From here, the story doesn't need momentum. It has it. And that's why 50 Cent isn't explaining himself. He doesn't need to. The explanation is unfolding in real time. His confidence reflects understanding, not prediction. Understanding that once a narrative locks, it doesn't ask permission. It moves forward. Before you leave, I want to hear your perspective. After everything we've broken down, do you believe Season 2 permanently changes how Diddy will be remembered? Or do you think the industry will eventually try to move past this without real accountability? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to stay informed as this story continues to evolve, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because at this stage, details matter more than ever, and this story is far from over.